Okay.
Okay, it's recording.
So hi everyone. This is the art volunteer thing for learning about art and various artists as well as art periods. And this week we're going to start with Michelangelo. And he was born in 1475 and died at 1564. So who is Michelangelo? He is considered one of the greatest, or if not the greatest, artists of all time. He was an incredible sculptor, painter, and an architect. And he was not restricted to one like form of art. A lot of famous artists are only good at one thing, and he was talented in many. One of his rivals, I think, was Leonardo da Vinci, and they were both known for being extremely talented in several aspects of artistry. So childhood. So Michelangelo was born in March 6th, 1475, and his mother was Francesca. I'm not going to say the whole name. And his father was named Ludovici. And they were not a particularly wealthy family. His father was relatively he was like a very small government official. His mother didn't work, I think, and he was born in the small town of Caprese. And later on, the family moved to Florence. However, he spent like a while in Caprese, and because his mother was very ill often, he would go live with his wet nurse. And the husband of his wet nurse was a stonecutter, and it said that this is where like he started getting interested in like stone making and like sculpting, which would later consider to be like his calling. um, and so when they moved to Florence, his mother died, I think, when he was 6. And so they were quite poor, and they had like a relatively hard time in life until his father got remarried to a much richer woman. And Michelangelo was finally able to go to a Latin school where he could learn like science and grammar and just a lot more things. He was able to get a lot more access to, but it proved that he wasn't really interested in school. He was only pretty much interested in art and sketching and later sculpting, of course. But his father discouraged him from artistry because at the time, artists weren't really considered to be extremely impressive. They would be like kind of lowly members of society, and they would be like the servants of higher nobles who would commission them to make things. So like it wasn't really considered honorable. So his father wanted him to like be more ambitious and to be like maybe more wealthy. Um, but Michelangelo, I think he made friends with one of Ghirlandaio's apprentices, and he was able to get apprenticed to this famous artist. Of course, he wasn't as famous as Michelangelo is later on, but he was pretty influential at the time. And so, of course, when Michelangelo got apprenticed, this was like a pretty big deal. And so that's kind of when his father relented and he was able to start pursuing art. And Domenico was an extremely famous or extremely influential like fresco painter at the time. He was known for like drawing like people and landscapes and like religious commissions and stuff. And so he taught Michelangelo like fresco painting, which included like mixing paints. And they used a plaster that would be like, then they would paint over it. And it was just the standard way of painting, fresco painting at the time. Unfortunately, Michelangelo, although he was extremely talented, he was also very prideful and kind of impertinent. And when he corrected one of his master's drawings, he finally got kicked out because his master just couldn't deal with his attitude anymore.
So next is his teenage life. So in his teenage life, he contacted an artist named Bertoldo di Giovanni, and this artist has noticed him before. And so Giovanni, he worked for Lorenzo, and after standing out from the rest of the artists, he was interested in the Medici family, and he was employed there. Next. And yeah, this is one of the sculptures that was sculpted by Michelangelo, and this is called the Head of Fawn, and it was sculpted in 1489. Okay, and Michelangelo, he lived with Medici as his patron, so like they worked together, and then they got like a relatively stable existence. So they were pretty famous during this period of time. And during this period of time, his life resulted in many of his earliest sculptures where he was developing his skills. During this period of time, he did a lot of sculptures, and his skill like increased. And this is another really famous sculpture by Michelangelo, and this is called Battles of the Centaurus, and this was sculpted in 1492. And this is another sculpture by Michelangelo called the Madonna of the Stairs, and this was sculpted in 1490. So you can see the more he sculpted, the better the sculptures are, and his work progressed.
Okay, so the next section in Michelangelo's life is his young adulthood. After Lorenzo's death, Michelangelo was out of work, and so he went back to Florence. And in Florence, he made a crucifix for the Florentine church, and in return, he was able to examine the dead bodies for anatomy. After that, he was able to find employment in Bologna due to the rise of churchmen in I have no idea. Salvarona, I think. Nude sculptures became discouraged, and well, back when Michelangelo was still alive, artists often made nude sculptures of people because they were more or less a testament to the artist's talent and required lots of skill to be able to perfect. He helped another Medici sell a fake antique named Cupid and got a commission in Rome by Cardinal Riaro. Yeah. So this is another one of his famous sculptures named, I think it's pronounced Bacchus. It's considered one of his first masterpieces, and it was commissioned by Cardinal Riardo. So, but then the cardinal refused to pay because the statue looked too drunk, which is not really a valid reason to not pay someone, but that's what happened. So at this point, Michelangelo didn't have much money and didn't have any patrons. So he had to get a new commission from French Cardinal Jean Billet de, I have no idea how that's pronounced, but he did get another commission to do a sculpture of Mary and Jesus. So it took 2 years to sculpt, as the marble was a pretty big size, 6 feet by 6 feet. I have no idea what that is in metric, but it's pretty big. It was a huge success after being displayed at the Vatican, which was I guess, just really important place, and propelled Michelangelo to become even more famous. All right, so, and then the next section is adulthood. So after he returned to Florence, he was commissioned to sculpt a statue of David. 2 previous artists have tried and failed to, I guess, correctly do that sculpture. Statue of David would be extremely difficult due to the size of the marble and how the previous attempts made the marble nearly unusable. So the statue of David took Michelangelo 3 years to sculpt, and it's a really big statue, reaching 14 feet in height, and was considered one of Michelangelo's greatest works ever. It reached universal acclaim, meaning pretty much everyone knew about it. So now that Michelangelo was at the prime of his career, he was commissioned by the Pope to design and build the Pope's tomb, which would generally be a huge honor to do. However, Michelangelo stopped multiple times and was forced to direct his attention elsewhere. So the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel was considered one of his most famous artworks, and but since Michelangelo was vastly displeased with the Pope, and only after several attempts by the Pope did he finally agree to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So the ceiling was initially depicted as a sky full of stars, but the Pope didn't think it was grand enough. So, and also to note, the size of the Sistine Chapel ceiling is nearly 500 square meters. So during painting the roof of the Sistine Chapel, or ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, he encountered many problems. He needed to transfer his designs onto the ceiling after experiencing many difficulties, he fired his assistant. It took him 4 years to paint the whole thing, and he had to paint standing with his head tilted up. And as you can imagine, that's pretty painful for just looking straight up for 4 years. So Michelangelo was very bad-tempered due to this experience. He painted in the style of frescoes, which he had not practiced since his apprenticeship under Ghirlandaio. Okay, designing the painting, I guess. So the general design of the painting was in the center of the ceiling, 9 scenes from the book of Genesis. It was divided into 3: creation of everything, humanity's forage into sin and subsequent expulsion, and finally humanity on earth. So each side of the ceiling, 12 prophetic figures or famous figures in Christianity, triangular pentatives, and different scenes from the Old Testament. So this is what the roof of the Sistine Chapel would have looked like, or looks like right now. And as you can imagine, it took a lot of work to complete because it was so big. This is another one of his paintings. This was probably the most famous painting, depicted in many works of art, even to like in the modern age.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, this is part of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and it was the most famous out of all of them, and it kind of represented how revolutionary his artwork on the Sistine Chapel's ceiling was, because Adam was depicted to have the perfect human form, and God was like revolutionary in the way that he portrayed him, because he like painted him the whole body, which was not something that the artists did back then. Like usually it would just be like some kind of force underneath that would represent God, and they wouldn't really draw something to represent the actual the God as like a person. And you can see that like in the other things, like every single one of them, they are people of a perfect form, and that's why people were so impressed with the way that he painted it. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so after his adulthood, I guess, as he got older, or after painting the Sistine Chapel, which was the height of Michelangelo's fame, Florence, in 1527, Florence began resisting the Medici, and and Michelangelo returned to health. So after Florence fell, the Pope granted Michelangelo amnesty and was able to return to artwork.
So this is another example of one of Michelangelo's paintings. And as you can see, it's very detailed as he was known for, and all the humans are formed very meticulously, and they were very accurate for the time because he was known for making very accurate human anatomy paintings. So Michelangelo died in February 8th, 1564 at the age of 89 after feeling sick. So keep in mind that this is in the 1500s. So living to the age of 89 was very rare because there were so many diseases and not so many medicines back then. So it's actually very interesting how long he lived, especially at that time period. And even though he lived a long time ago, he still remains one of the most famous and influential artists today. We can see a lot of references of his work everywhere in pop culture, and his art style even prompted the movement of Mannerism in Western art, which occurred after 1564. So that's just one of the examples of how influential he is. And a lot of his work is still displayed in places like Rome and Florence. And his work is very famous and popular in museums, and you guys can learn about it in places like that. So this is another example of one of his paintings. It's called the Bat of Cassina, and it was made in 1504. And in this painting, you can see many people seemingly fighting with each other. And Michelangelo's paintings usually have a deeper meaning behind them. So you guys can think by yourself what this painting might depict, or what Michelangelo wanted you guys to see in this painting. And here's another one named The Dying Slave, and he made this in 1516. And it's not a painting, it's a sculpture, and you can see how detailed it is and how there's fabric lines inside his shirt, so it actually looks like a piece of fabric. So this is another statue that he made, and you can see the detail in the fabric folds. And even though it is made out of stone, it really looks lifelike. And you can also see the detail in the hair and the facial features, and also like the muscles in the neck, and how he really paid attention to every aspect of the sculpture. This is another sculpture called the Deposition, and you can really see how he tried to convey emotion through like the way everyone is positioned, and not to mention the detail.
Okay, so that is the last of the slides here. So obviously you can tell that Michelangelo led an incredible life with many achievements in several fields. If you guys are more interested in his life, like go research about it. He has numerous fascinating things that happened to him in his lifetime.